Blog Talk Radio.
Did you know there's a secret place to expand your mind? A place to escape the same old negative news? Welcome to Colombo Chronicles Live with Rose Colombo, award-winning author, cable TV and radio host, poet, and advocate for justice. Rose has been seen and heard on local and national TV and radio. She's consulted with victims of injustice for more than 20 years. Her articles have been published in major and local newspapers and magazines. Listen live as Rose Colombo welcomes prominent authors and experts to her podcast every Wednesday from noon to 1 p.m. Pacific Time at blogtalkradio.com/Colombo Chronicles. You can call in and ask questions at 646-564-9742. Follow Rose Colombo every Wednesday from 12 noon to 1 p.m. on Colombo Chronicles Live at blogtalkradio.com/Colombo Chronicles.
Hi, everyone. This is the Rose Colombo, right here for you on Colombo Chronicles Live.
Colombo Chronicles Live. Colombo is on their trail. Listen up at Colombo Chronicles Live.
Yes, everyone, listen up because today is a great day. It is Wednesday, hump day, right before the weekend, so you're almost there. You can make your plans and enjoy Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. But first, I'm glad you tuned in to Colombo Chronicles because every Wednesday we have an exciting show just for you with fantastic people from around the nation, sometimes from around the world. Authors and experts on a myriad of topics that are of human interest, not just to Americans, but people around the world. And this podcast does reach people around the world. But first I wanted to mention that America was founded and built on faith in God. And we have a really special guest today who has a strong faith in God. And remember, the Declaration of Independence is coming up. Independence Day, July 4th, 1776. So I just wanted to remind you what it states. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And that's what we all strive for, and that's why we always become involved with our communities, our counties, our states, and our federal government to ensure that that statement will always be preserved for not only ourselves, but for our children, grandchildren, and future generations. John Adams, he was the second president of the United States of America. I just want to remind you that your vote counts. And so people are thinking about 2022. So remember that you are important and you have power, and you have power at the polls. And John Adams, America's second president, stated, "Our Constitution was made only for a moral and religious people. It is wholly inadequate to the government of any other." Isn't that a powerful, powerful statement? The framers were all God-fearing men, and they truly believed in that statement and in many, many other writings that they created and many, many wonderful actions that they took to create and write the United States Constitution, the Bill of Rights, and the Declaration of Independence. Thank God for these great God-fearing men, right? Well, now let me tell you the name of our fantastic guest. And her name is Yolanda Nava. That's N like Nancy, A, V like Victor, A. Yolanda Nava. And she is an Emmy award-winning broadcast journalist, a columnist, an author appearing on NBC, CBS, PBS, and cable television stations in Los Angeles, Sacramento, and nationally. She is the author of the best-selling award-winning book of Latino Virtues, It's All in the Frijoles. She is a political wife, mother, honored community leader. In 2009, Yolanda suddenly lost sight in both eyes. But she continues to inspire and empower others through her writing and speaking. She is an amazing, amazing woman. And we're going to tell you a little bit more about Yolanda Nava, and we'll be back in just a moment after this important message, so don't touch that dial.
Colombo Chronicles Live. Colombo is on their trail. Listen up at Colombo Chronicles Live.
Howdy, folks. Just stopped in by my favorite restaurant, the Horseshoe Cafe. I highly recommend the home-cooked hot meals and piping hot coffee. In fact, it reminds me of my mom's home cooking when I was growing up. The customer service is excellent. Be sure to save room.
Colombo Chronicles Live. Colombo is on their trail. Listen up at Colombo Chronicles Live.
Hi, Yolanda. This is Rose from Colombo Chronicles, and I want to welcome you to Colombo Chronicles Live. How are you?
Oh, great. Thank you so much for having me on the program, Rose. Look forward to it.
Oh, thank you. We had a little technical problem there, but I think we cleared it up. You never know what's going to happen, right?
Oh, the freedom of our existence, yes.
Oh, well. And Yolanda, I'm very excited to have you on our show. You're such a dynamic woman, and I thoroughly enjoyed reading your book. And I was wondering if it's okay with you if we could start off with you telling our audience about your marriage and kids and juggling a career in journalism and winning an Emmy Award, which has, as we all know, is very difficult to do because, you know, America is all about family, and juggling a family alone is difficult for women. So would you mind telling us a little bit about that part of your life?
Oh, no, and that was so long ago. My children are all grown up, and my daughter just graduated from law school. She just turned 40. And my son is a few years older, and he is now in an elected post in San Francisco. Their father was a legislator in the state of California in the Assembly and the Senate. So I was a broadcast journalist. He was a politician. I started out as the first woman who was Mexican-American to appear on a network affiliate in Los Angeles, so that was really a privilege to be a pioneer that way back in the day. This is a long time back in the 70s. And I was pregnant on air, and I was with my first child, and KNBC allowed me, didn't say a word, just kept me on the air. I worked up until 2 weeks before the delivery. And then I chose to take off. Chose to take off 2 years with each child. I nursed them. I stayed at home. I wanted to give them that grounding. And then I went back to work after 2 years with each child and, moved up each time. It was a great time. It was exciting because I was an activist in the women's movement as well. I had to back away from that. Once I became a journalist, it would be, a little conflict of interest there if I were advocating. But it was so exciting back then, Rose, and I'm sure you're familiar with those times too, when you had the civil rights movement, you had the Chicano movement that was starting up, the Chicana movement of women, Latino women, and And so I was serving on board, dragging my pregnant body to a California Highway Patrol commission that was exploring the possibility of bringing women into law enforcement. And we set the standards that ended up, going across the country. And that was just so exciting to serve on that body, because there were men on it that said, over my dead body will a woman be working here? And Governor Brown fired that commissioner who made that statement. It was a commission to explore the feasibility of women. So I was doing that kind of stuff. I was doing broadcast. I was a Capitol correspondent. I was an anchor up in Sacramento during the time I had my young children, the first one and the second. And then I went to L.A. again. I went through a divorce. That was husband number 2. And but it was a really great time, because we were a very influential and positive couple representing, a statewide Latino community. And that was really an honor and a privilege. And I learned a lot from that political experience, and I learned a lot from having young children. So you can do it all. That was the hardest time to do it, because I was a groundbreaker and there were no models for me. And I was fortunate that KNBC was so hospitable and really supportive. And when I left, I left. When I came back, they opened up the doors again. And so I really feel, really honored that I had that early experience and was able to continue my advocacy, as board member on many groups. And to juggle all that with babies in tow. I was pregnant with Joaquin on that CHP board, and then I was nursing, and Joan Dempsey Klein, who later went to the state appellate court, was the chairman of that committee, and she said, Yolanda, you're bringing your baby, you're doing everything you're going to do and have done, and just you bring that baby to the meetings. Oh, God, those men were just choking. So, it was a great time.
It's amazing, though, that at that time there was women who were understanding and getting positions where they could allow other women to nurse their babies on the job. And because that was a big controversy back in the 90s. Even in the 90s, it was a huge controversy. And there was a lot of controversies, like with child care. And so did you use child care because there was not that much child care while you were working? Well, you were working at that time.
Well, I did what many women did who were breaking ground back in the day. I had a Peruvian housekeeper. I had a Mexican housekeeper, and without those people available to take care of our children, many of us could never have gone to work and moved up the ladder. And so I'm very grateful for that. And I later wrote letters for amnesty for the women that worked for us, and it was controversial, but it was quality care and it was loving care, and I'm just very glad that was available, because many of us could not have worked and many of us could not have moved up.
Right, I remember it quite well because I was an activist with Women Fight Back, an organization I founded, and that was one of our main concerns, was that there was not enough child care for the women, and that was back in the 90s. We were fighting for that. So that's why I wanted to ask you about how you were juggling all this, because prior to that, everybody had to get a babysitter, and it was getting more difficult as the divorce increased, and people women needed child care so badly, or they were going back to college. So I was glad to hear about that. And so you lived in New Mexico, right? With your husband and your children?
Later. Yeah, this was not with my second husband. I went to New Mexico in 2001 as a consultant. I was single at the time. I had my husband, my children's father, and I had divorced years earlier. And when actually they were quite young, which is unfortunate, but that's life. And the time in New Mexico came in kind of a separate framework or separate time in my life. I was on air I went off air in 1991 after winning an Emmy Award. That was for Earthquake, and the Los Angeles earthquake. And I went back into education because now I was a single mother and with two young children, 5 and 10. And I needed to have more control over my schedule because the station wasn't as friendly as KNBC, and they would change my schedule every 2 weeks. And, of course, with children, how do you get them to school and have childcare? And then I didn't have a live-in housekeeper. I had to drop off and pick up and, juggle all of that. So I've done it every way you can do it, Rose. And it is a challenge. It still is. I demand and propose that we do include human infrastructure in our, in the plan to rebuild our country, because without that child care, as you know, being an advocate yourself, without that child care, women cannot work. And we need them. We need to be able to work, and we need to be able to have care for our children. That's quality care.
Exactly, and it's still an ongoing battle, so we have to keep it alive, and that's another reason I wanted to mention it, because I want to recognize all those single women out there who need, or married women, who seek to have careers or go back to college and get their degrees, and they have to juggle the family and the children and their lives and their work too. It's quite a task for most women, and it's still alive, and we still need to remember that. And so you also mentioned, which caught my attention too, the term behind the mask. What do you mean by behind the mask?
Well, that's moving way forward. That's now in this, my book came out in May of this year, Through the Dark, and it is a story of moving through a life-threatening disease and sudden blindness and coming to thrive. That mention of the knower, I call it the knower behind the mask, is chapter 11 in the book. And chapter 11 in the book. And I refer to that, Rose, because how do we describe the unseen? How do we, I moved through my time in the hospital. I was very ill. I didn't realize how sick I was with a yet undiagnosed autoimmune illness, which kills people if it's not detected in time. It's fatal. And I prayed my way through that hospital experience, connected with teachings that my mother had provided when I was a young child. She was really a very, very wise and aware woman. She was older when I was born. She was 35. And then I've studied, spirituality and metaphysics and philosophy across the decades of my life. And so I wanted to be able to explain, who is it that guides us? Who is it that talks to us? Who is it that helps move us through these experiences that we have? And I call it the knower because we could call it the unseen, Yahweh, Allah, Jehovah, God, Charlie, the thing itself. It doesn't matter. It is the native populations refer to it as a great spirit because it is unknowable and unseen. So I use the term the knower behind the mask as our higher self, who we can talk to and who can move us through very difficult times. And it's been a guiding light for me all my life. I've studied different religions, as a student. And in my 30s, I did intensive journal workshops with Ira Progoff, who was a depth psychologist, a student of Carl Jung, who had a process of dialogue journaling. I took classes from Bill Hornaday, who was at that time the spiritual director, the minister of the Founders Church of Religious Science. I've studied Episcopal. I do Torah study today with a girlfriend on Saturdays with a girlfriend who's in Santa Barbara. I love that synagogue up there and the group there. And so I continue to study, and I came up with knower just to have an unusual and different way of explaining it. Also, the knower and the friend and the counselor are terms that are used in Vedanta, in Hinduism, and I've drawn from ancient as well as contemporary philosophy and religion, spirituality, to move through my own life. And in my book, I talk about the transitions and using these different principles. I call them spiritual tools, which come across different ancient and contemporary, philosophies, religions. It's not religion that's important here. It's the spiritual principles that are at work that I think we're moving more and more towards.
Well, going back now, would you tell our audience what happened a little bit about, I don't want to give the whole book away, but what happened to you that when you were found that you were having this autoimmune system problem and you were having problems with your eyesight, and were you afraid? What were your feelings? Were you angry? Were you afraid? Because here you are, an Emmy Award-winning journalist and poet and broadcaster, and you have a beautiful family. So what were your inner feelings at the time that this was happening to you?
I did not have what my doctor, Lord Spiro, said, the usual normal reaction, of crisis, self-pity, fear, whatever. I was so sick physically, but mentally I was very strong. Spiritually, I was very strong. And so I didn't realize I was sick. I just felt weaker, and, I lost sight in one eye, and then I, lost 3.5 weeks later, lost the sight of the other eye. And, the loss of the first eye was, okay, oh, well, all right, I can still see, I'm very flexible, Rose, and I kind of roll with the punches, and water rolls off my back like a duck on the big, difficult things. And I've always been that way for some reason, probably because of my, intuition and spiritual awareness. But I could see the beautiful garden I had. I was living in Santa Fe at the time, and we had this expansive lawn, and in the distance we had, a field, and the Sangre and the Cristo Mountains are off in the further distance, and I could see all of this with one eye. So that wasn't a problem yet. And I did feel a little weak. I had to languish a lot because I couldn't, I didn't have the energy. But I got myself to Los Angeles, and that got me into the hospital. My children, my friends just came to the rescue, and my children and my children's father helped me get care. And that was a wonderful experience because I was rescued out of an environment that was very difficult, very hostile. I went through a divorce 6 months after I got out of the hospital, so I was in really recovery state. But there was no choice but to take care of that and deal with it at the worst possible time because it would have killed me if I'd stayed in that marriage. That was number 3 marriage. So my girlfriend, when I arrived at a friend's home, she had come and brought me back to her home because she knew I needed help and care and I wasn't going to get it in New Mexico. She brought me back to her house and called my children and activated everyone. I call her she was my clarion call, Cecilia. And I'm in bed and I don't realize how sick I am. And my friend Kathy came in and she's talking and her voice is traumatized. I mean, you could feel the terror in her voice. I said, "Oh, Kathy, don't overreact. I'm fine. You always overreact kind of thing." And years later, she told me this, like about 3 or 4 years ago. She said, "Yolanda, you weren't fine." She said, "You look like you're going to die any minute. Your skin was as white as the sheets in your bed, your clothing that you were wearing. You looked like you were going to die any minute. We were afraid we're going to lose you. And here you're telling me, blowing me off and waving your hands at me nonetheless." So, Rose, I don't know. That came from I don't know where. Again, the intuitive self, the higher self, that knower self. And I could, be very light about it now, but I was dying. I was told years later by, again, my friend Kathy, that she overheard the doctor say it's a good time we arrived at a diagnosis and began treatment immediately. Yolanda would have been dead in another few days. It took them 5 weeks to diagnose. The illness was so unusual. I don't even mention it because I never owned it. And I always said what was diagnosed was. And but it was started very simply with a sinus and ear infections, and I saw doctors. I was taking antibiotics and prednisone for 10 months, and then no testing showed any problem, and then all of a sudden I'm blind. So that got me to the hospital in L.A., and that saved my life, St. John's Hospital.
Well, Dr. Pearl says, I knew that while I might be transforming her life by diagnosing and arresting this terrible disease process that robbed her sight and threatened to take her life, she was simultaneously transforming me by showing me how to live a fearless life. She was actually facing down the prospect of being sightless for the rest of her life without flinching. I really couldn't believe it. So I do believe that your inner strength and your belief in a higher power, whichever that higher power may be, was a positive strength in your life. So were you close to your parents while you were growing up, to your mother and father?
Yes, I was, and my mother was older. She was very traditional in many ways, but she was very advanced in her spiritual thought. And her mentor was Mary Baker Eddy, and she taught me those principles. I went to Sunday school from the time I was 3 to 18. I played the organ in Sunday school when I was, a teenager. And then I went off to college at 18 and, started exploring all, different religions and different thought ideas and systems. But those principles of perfection and our inherent, our perfection, our intelligence, our resilience, our everything comes from, I'll say, God is what I call it. And the identification with, she was always telling me things like, you don't have to do this alone, Yolanda. Ask God to help you, and desirous prayer and just all manner of positive thoughts that, spiritual thoughts that I didn't understand at the time, Rose, but as an adult, I have grown into those principles, and when I was in the hospital, I drew from them. I drew from the scientific statement of being that I was taught as a young child. I drew from my mother's words and wisdom. I drew from spiritually affirmative prayer, which I've learned in later years. I drew from it all in that hospital. That's how I got through, and I left the hospital in a state of recovery and healing, and within a year I was phased off the medications, which were very heavy, and in a matter of 15 months I was disease-free, and I've been disease-free ever since.
So in the back of your book, it says, there is no evidence to support the allegation that Yolanda's husband was trying to poison her. Was there allegations that your husband was trying to poison you? Not allegations is not the word. The word allegation shouldn't be there. If it is, I'm going to change it, or the publisher should change it, because what I was just stating was a disclaimer that there were several people who felt, friends that did not know each other, who all asked me, are you sure your husband's not poisoning you? You're so healthy. You're a poster child for health. And so there was that thought floating around, and of course there's no evidence of that. And I never chose to believe that as a possibility. In fact, I can't fathom it. But I became very ill very suddenly, and so a lot of people had questions about that. And I put that in there just so that I also changed the husband's name
to protect his privacy and tell. It's my story. It's not really about him. But it was a difficult marriage, and I think a lot of times I have a feeling that at times many women and men, but I more, identify more with women. Many women do become ill because they're living out of congruence with who they really are, perhaps are in the wrong relationship or marriage. And I know for myself, I talk about this a lot in the book, and I own my responsibility in staying in a marriage that I knew within 2 weeks I should have left. But I didn't have the courage. Not the courage. It wasn't convenient. And I was so embarrassed that I had made a wrong choice. I really didn't know the man when I married him. We were friends. But I made assumptions that this was a good person and so on and so forth. And he probably was when I first knew him, and something happened. Something was awry. And so I say to women, I do think we need to look closely at our deeper feelings about when something doesn't feel right, or if there is abuse of any kind going on, or if there's just some kind of perhaps intuitive feeling that we disregard because we don't want to see things. And that's why I write that when I was sighted, I was blind to many things. And since the blindness, I've become much more spiritually discerning and aware.
That was my point, too, because I think, from reading your book, that you actually received more enlightenment and more empowerment, and now you have more wisdom to speak to the younger women that you advocate to as a journalist and as a writer. And I think that we have some of these experiences because we do become more aware of our own mistakes, or, through being younger and not having the experience in life. But now these experiences can turn into a positive like you are doing now and help other people as well. I wanted to ask you, too, I know you went to Brazil and that you also visited John of God. How do you feel about those visits?
Well, I went before all of the accusations against him that occurred a few years later after my visit. I have a mentor who suggested several years before I went. I went there in 2017, in March of 2017. She had suggested years before that she says, I know you're going to go see John of God. And I was in the midst of writing this book, and I didn't want to break away, and I didn't have the money. And so I put that aside. And then in the desert, I live in the desert. I attend the Center for Spiritual Living in Palm Desert, and they took a trip to see John of God. And so that's the second time it's mentioned. And then my friend again mentioned, you should go see John of God. So I finally committed to doing that. Somehow I put the money together before I even left the country and paid off the rest of it within 6 months. So, when you commit to something, you find a way to do it. And I managed to do it. And I'm glad I did because it was a very special trip. A new friend said, I understand you're going to see John of God. She says, would you like a roommate? I needed that, Rose. I didn't want to go to I didn't speak, they speak Portuguese in Brasilia, not Spanish. I can speak Spanish. I can travel anywhere in Latin America. And so I really needed to have a roommate to navigate around unknown terrain. And Grace is a psychiatrist that works at she does teach too, that works at the USC Medical Center, and also I met her through a mutual friend, another mentor who wrote a book about Jungian psychology and Tibetan Buddhism, Ranmila Moakkanen. And so Grace and I went to Brasilia and did the experience, they call it a pilgrimage, for 2 weeks at Abadania. And it was a wonderful experience. It was beautiful. The site was magnificent, high up on some kind of hilltop bluff overlooking a valley that's lush and green. And they had crystal bed therapy and meditation and big lectures. And it was a very peaceful experience. Organic food at our hotel, and a lot of peaceful time. They did a process called spiritual. I think they call it spiritual surgery. Maybe they call it something else right now. But the knifeless surgery. I'm sorry. It's called knifeless surgery, and when you passed by him, he would sense you'd set your intentions for what you wanted to accomplish while you were there. And then he would do this knifeless surgery, and you had to rest for 24 hours in silence, and as if you had some kind of surgical, medically surgical procedure. I don't know what was done. I just know that I went through that period of time, and I left there just feeling very whole. And I set 3 intentions. One, of course, to restore the sight. Which technically, without having physical sight, people say you see better than most people, because I could see and feel so much more, as you said, now than I did when I had physical sight. That was a really incredible experience. I didn't expect 3 intentions. I only expected 1. And so when I had to come up with 3, I got, oh my goodness, what am I going to say? And I added 2 more intentions, and it was just an amazing time.
One of the positive things I read that came out of that was a man named Drew, which I think is probably a good memory for you, and was one of your good intentions that came out of that visit. Is that right? Who's Drew?
Absolutely. One of my 3rd intention, I don't know where this came from, Rose. my third intention
would have been one of mine.
Well, I should have had it years before, but my third intention was to be able to love a man unconditionally and to be loved unconditionally in return. And I had joked about that with female friends, months before I left. I said, I'm going to meet a Brazilian businessman on blah, blah, blah. I said, well, that's not practical. I don't want to live in Brazil. And then I said, I'm going to meet him on the airplane. Well, that's not practical, because he could live anywhere on the planet and fly to Los Angeles. And finally, I just left it at I'm going to meet, I'm going to encounter, an unconditional love. And it was funny because I left Brazil at 5:00 on Saturday. The time is different there. And I arrived in Los Angeles on Sunday morning. And at the very time I flew out of Brasilia, Drew called me and left a message that a friend of ours, a mutual friend of ours, had told him about me, and he wanted to meet me. And so to call him. And so I called my friend to, scope him out and see what was this all about. She didn't return my call. And so the next day I was in Los Angeles for a week. And I called him on Monday, and we had a 45-minute talk, and we had a date the following Saturday night, long story short. And we began a relationship that, went on for, almost 2 years. And so and then he went away to travel. He had gone through a divorce and needed to, rebuild his nest egg and to work. He said, I can't do both. I can't do a relationship and travel and fly and do what I'm doing. I can't give you what I want now. And that was very, clear. But it was an amazing relationship because it manifested something that I've never experienced. And I think when you're young and when you're dumb, as we often are when we're young,
can relate to that, yes.
And I never knew about unconditional love. I'd heard of it, but I didn't understand it. I've never experienced it until the relationship with Drew. And so he is very special in my life. I have absolutely no regrets. We've been out of touch. I call it hiatus. But I feel his presence. I feel his inspiration. He's been a muse in my life and a mentor. And it's just interesting because the unconditionality of that love continues to nourish me, even though I haven't talked to him for a couple of years.
I think that's a fabulous love story of unconditional love, and I'm so glad you got to experience it, because the only unconditional love that we actually truly know about, it comes from a higher power, and to experience it on earth, I think is a fabulous experience at any age. I don't think the age matters. I think a lot of old people are young and a lot of young people are old. So
right. It's an amazing experience, and one of the things that I hold at the Center for Spiritual Living, one of the, kind of affirmative songs and thoughts and prayers that we do is, as we look at, or as the audience, I don't see it, but they're showing images of people all over the world, diverse peoples all over the world, and singing this song, "You Are the Face of Love." People of all colors and cultures and religions and, ways of thinking. And I think that's where we want to be. We need to be. We need to learn to love one another. Each of the great, Abrahamic religions teaches that. Buddhism teaches that. All thought systems, philosophies teach us to love one another, to learn to love one another. And as expressions of the same creator, there's only one creator, whatever we call it. And the idea, I hold him as the face of love for me, the face of God, and in my life. And I have so many angels, Rose, that come to my aid all the time. If I'm disoriented when I'm traveling or something, somebody immediately comes up to offer assistance, and I sometimes pray them in because I need them. I need an angel right now. Okay, give me an angel. Bring it on. And Wayne Dwyer used to say, you have to make demands on God and ask for what you want. And so I'm learning to do that more and more in a very affirmative way. But unconditional love, as you say, is what we receive from our Creator and what all the traditions teach. We need to love one another as fellow human beings and care for others and be kind to others in order to serve that Creator who loves us so freely and unconditionally.
That is very beautiful, and that is very true. And hopefully we will see that come to fruition with books such as yours, which is entitled Through the Dark, by Yolanda, Nava, N-A-V-A. And Yolanda, you're also a poet. You write beautiful poetry.
Yes, and you are a poet. That's why, I began writing poetry in August of 2018. I wrote Drew, a love poem, and that began my poetry writing. And I think having my heart, the trauma, in fact, I'm pitching a presentation on this, the idea of exploring compassion through personal trauma, that when we go through trauma, people shouldn't complain about it because it helps us grow. It either kills us or grows us, But
hopefully it grows us.
So we want to thrive and we want to grow from our experiences. So we need to ask our challenging experiences, our traumatic experiences, what is the lesson here? And that's what I ask myself. But the growth is really what is so important, and the love that we can come to feel. And I think my poetry came from when my heart broke open like a walnut. I mean, I went through some real hard stuff that I write about in the book. And ultimately, not initially, but ultimately when I went through boot camp, what I call it. But the idea of my heart just totally opening up to that unconditional love, just opened up the heart produces the poetry. And
also what I got from your book, too, was that you feel that we need to learn to accept what is and not what was, but to accept what is in our present day.
Yes.
And our present time.
That's very important. That exists in more Asian thought than in our Western thought. We want to change everything, but living the present moment is the only moment we have in reality. We don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. If the sun is going to rise, thank God it does. And when we rise with it, we're blessed, and we have another day of life and a way to live and expand and learn and grow and love, hopefully. So the process of poetry for me and I'm not trained. I took one class in college just to read the stuff, and I read Auden and Tate, and more recently I've been in touch with a poet in Northern California. He's the poet laureate there. And Rafael Jesus Gonzalez, who wrote praise for the book in the front pages, a beautiful poet. I just love his work in Spanish and English. And so I'm inspired to do work my English poems and get them cleaned up and then translate them into Spanish and do a bilingual poetry book that I want to do in Mexico. So I'm looking at that side of myself because it's such a foreign side to me. I'm not typically, traditionally, a real emotional person.
What you're actually telling us is that it doesn't matter your age and it doesn't matter your traumas. If you take them and you use them for good and to continue to grow and expand your mind at any age, you will never grow old. You will just become wiser, and you will have more information to share and leave behind for the younger people that are coming up in the world, to never give up and to keep on moving no matter what happens to you in life. Look at how to get over that wall or under it or around it or through it, and with your angels. And, you know, Yolanda, you have a beautiful poem here. It's called Stormy Emotions Vanquished. Would it be okay if I read it? I hope I do justice to it.
Oh, absolutely. Thank you. I'd be honored.
This is by Yolanda Nava. Stormy Emotions Vanquished. Stormy emotions are like cloudy skies, creating darkness of thought. Emotions as clouds are subject to the winds of change. Stormy emotions impede the peace, for hope and harmony are required as are faith and trust to break up storm clouds, to be present to that space of knowing all is well. The challenge to quiet the mind, to clear out the negative thought, the demons that control our stormy days. Demons of anger, jealousy, resentment, addiction, fear. Acceptance overcomes resistance. Love conquers fear. Mindfulness vanquishes anger. Forgiveness triumphs over all, bringing in clear skies and sunny and joyous days. By Yolanda Nava, February 1st, 2020. That is such a touching and beautiful poem, Yolanda.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. I enjoyed writing it and experiencing how to put what I experienced myself out there in a way that other people could understand it, to be able to express what I experienced, what I write about, in a way that, that other voice, that other kind of expression which poetry allows, and you're familiar with as a poet yourself. And I think we could all write poetry. I wrote my first poems in my 20s, but I left it aside, didn't do anything until 2018. It took, all the trouble to shake everything up. But the love opened it up. So thank you for reading it. I love that poem because it is a time of moving through the counter to that, which was stormy emotions, where I felt like I was fighting the four horsemen of the apocalypse at the same time. That's a different poem. But this poem I thought would be nice to share this morning because we want to uplift and heal. You know, so many have suffered so much through this pandemic, and just life creates a lot of challenge. And I think one thing I can say to people, especially young people, because they're wondering, you know, why they're having such a hard time and depression, and it's you know, when you don't have what you want in the moment, you feel cheated and angry and frustrated and perhaps depressed. But it's to be able to ask the question, why this experience? And I ask myself, why blindness? To what am I blind? And in asking those questions and the other questions I've asked myself, you know, in recent years, I've just gotten so many wonderful answers. Seek and you shall find, ask and you shall receive. And every time I ask a question, by God, I get an answer. Sometimes it's a hit over the head, you know, but I get the answer.
Well, one of the positive things for me is that because of your experience, that it brought you to Colombo Chronicles Live, and it was Through the Dark by Yolanda Nava. And I am very honored to have spoken with you today. And on that note, unfortunately, I could talk to you forever. We have to wind it up, but Yolanda, I want you to give what you feel is the most important message during these trying times and challenges, that everyone can pick themselves up and do something positive, as well as where they can find your book and also any websites you might have or contacts.
Okay, my book is Through the Dark. It's available online on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Books A Million, wherever local books are sold. It's distributed by Ingram Spark. My website is www.yolandanava.com. In terms of what's important now, I think we have to practice what most of us have been taught over the course of our lives, those principles of love and kindness and consideration and love of one another, of care of the other. We are our brothers and sisters' keepers in many ways, and we can come to want the same good for people all over the world of different backgrounds and cultures and class, everything that we want for ourselves. And somehow we can come to learn to love, and in doing that, we can discover what really is ours to do. Perhaps we're socially programmed to do one thing or the other, but perhaps we know in ourselves that there's something we really long to do. And this time has opened that up for many people, and it can continue to open us up to what is ours to do, what is our higher purpose, because we each have one. We've each been given gifts and talents, and we need to develop those and give them back to the world. And life can change every day and every moment by the decisions that we make, by the choices we make, by the intentions we set. So I would leave people with set the highest intentions you can for yourself and be as loving and kind and meek and caring as you possibly could be.
That is beautiful, and you're beautiful, and you're a beautiful lady, and I hope everyone goes out and buys a copy or goes online and buys a copy, Through the Dark, and by Yolanda Nava, N-A-V, like Victor A. Nava. And thank you so much, and God bless you, and I hope I get to talk to you in the future and see what you're up to, because you have a lot going for you.
I'm very grateful for this opportunity, and you're a terrific interview, so I've enjoyed this immensely. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
And Yolanda Nava has left the building, and I want you to go out and get a copy of this book. It's going to touch you, and it's going to empower you and enlighten you through the dark, Yolanda Nava. And, there's never darkness. I mean, seriously. And sometimes darkness is good. There are books on turning out the lights because sometimes we need to be in the dark, alone, and meditating and getting the cobwebs out of our heads and start thinking about ourselves and what we want to do with the rest of our lives and how we're going to get there and what strategies we're going to use to get there and how is it going to help other people, because when we give back, we get back. And so it is a world of evolving people that are seeking answers, and the only way to find answers is to share your stories, because when you share your stories on Colombo Chronicles Live, you are helping someone else who maybe needs information that they can't get anywhere else except from authors and experts like Yolanda Nava or many of the others we've had on our show. By the way, you can always come back to blogtalkradio.com/Colombo Chronicles, and you can scroll on down. Many of the shows are archived, so you can listen to your favorite authors and experts on a myriad of topics, from love to health to romance to the mafia to the Constitution to political issues of the day. And believe me, you have a wonderful line of authors and experts from around the nation and the world who know what they're talking about and can help you in whatever topic you're looking for. So I want to say God bless you. God bless America. And tune in every Wednesday from noon to 1 p.m. where we'll have another dynamic guest. And remember, injustices can happen to you and they can happen to me. But together we can make a positive difference. Remember, you are never alone when you tune into Colombo Chronicles Live.
Rose Colombo is signing off, and she's left the building. Be sure to bookmark and share Colombo Chronicles Live every Wednesday from 8 to 9 p.m. on the West Coast. Or if you're sleepless in the big city, that would be 11 to midnight on the East Coast. Rose Colombo says, remember, you're never alone when you tune in every Wednesday to Colombo Chronicles.